Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Welcome to my tutorial on Vue custom directives. So the prerequisites for this are pretty straightforward. You're going to need an understanding of JavaScript, obviously, and a basic understanding of Vue. So if you don't have the basics of Vue down, you can go to the Vue documentation. It's fantastic. It'll tell you everything you need to know in their guide to get you up and running. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So what is a Vue directive? Well, a directive takes a plain HTML element and does stuff with it. So let's just create a new file here as an example, directives.vue. You've probably seen these many times before. So for example, h1 v text, that's an example of a directive. So what that does is that'll take a variable and insert it into this element. Okay, so notice that we're just dealing with this h1 element here. That's one key concept you need to know about directives. If you had a whole bunch of list items, you could say v-4 equals animal in animals. This is a directive also. So the important part here is the v dash. That's the indication that it's a directive, 4 being the name of the directive. Another example of a directive that you probably use all the time would be, what about v-if? v-if equals true, and of course if that's true then this element will be displayed, and if that's false then this element will not be displayed. So once again, notice that we're just doing something with this single HTML element here. So now that you know what a directive is, we're going to create a project, and to do that I'm going to use Vue CLI. And if you don't have that already, you can easily just Google Vue CLI and grab it using npm. So here we go. You can just grab that there, copy, paste it into your terminal, and that'll set up Vue CLI globally for you. And once that's set up, you'll be able to go Vue, create, and then the name of your project. So in this case, let's think of a good name. What about custom directives? It's always good to name things properly. Now it's going to give us some default settings here, but I'm actually going to go to manual because sometimes ESLint can be annoying, especially when you're just playing around with things. So we're going to go manual, and I'm going to choose CSS processes because that may, preprocessors, that may come in handy. And we'll put that in, just in the package.json. What's it asking now? Save this as a preset for future projects. No! And that's going to create the project for me. This can take a while, so have a sip of water or a coffee while you wait. Sometimes I get the feeling that NPM doesn't have very good servers in Australia. Okay, there we go, so that's done. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cd into the project. I've almost forgotten what it's called now. There we go. Luckily it's written right here for me. cd custom directives npm run serve, and then that'll be served and ready to go. But before I do that, I'm actually going to open code in this directory, get back into my other version of code and get out of that. Oop, and make sure everything's big for you guys. Okay, and we are good to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get rid of a lot of this boilerplate that they give to us. So we're going to go to app, get rid of this image up here, get rid of all of the styling. I like to just try and start things from scratch. Save that. We're basically going to do the same thing with this hello world component. Get rid of everything inside there. They give you quite a bit. There we go. Maybe just make our own div inside there. Make sure it's indented nicely. Don't think I'm going to need this prop. We can keep that name. Get rid of the styling here. I reckon that's about it. So let's just run npm run serve inside here. And that'll open up, that'll start a server for our project. This is really cool, by the way. I love that Vue CLI has made this so easy. I mean, how awesome was that? It was so easy to set this up. And also they got heaps of cool new features planned for the future. So check that out. All right, so I can control click this. And we got our local host running. Let's just check that it's working by putting in an input. There we go, worked that time. Yep, everything's running. Seems to be going good. So let's move on. Now let's take this one piece at a time. First, I'm just going to create a h1 here. We're going to give it a directive, v dash, meaning it is a directive, and magic being the name of the directive. Okay, let's put a bit of text in here so we've got something to work with. Harry Potter, he's somebody magical. And we're going to go to main.js. And now before we instantiate Vue, we're going to give it the magic directive. Okay, so vue.directive, that's how you create a directive with vue.directive. And the first argument is a string with the name of the directive. In this case, magic. Okay, and the next argument is going to be an object, which is all the hooks, all the cool stuff that we can hook into so that we can do something cool with this directive. The first one we'll look at is bind. Whoop, let's see if I can spell that right. Bind. So let's console.log bound. There we go. So we got the word Harry Potter and the directive is working because we've console.log bound there. All right, so let's take this one piece at a time. The first argument that bind accepts is a HTML element. Okay, so that will be this here. It will be this element right here, the actual h1 itself. So let's do something with that. We're going to go HTML element and change the color, style.color, to pink. Okay, so save that. There we go. Simple as that. You've made your first directive. So it's really straightforward. All we're doing is we're saying the name of the directive, and then we're going into one of the hooks, in this case bind, and then we're doing something with that directive. Okay, so we've got this HTML element that we can do whatever we want with. The world is your oyster, so to speak. Well, maybe not the world, but this one HTML element itself. So making things pink is pretty cool, but it's not very dynamic. What if we want to pass in our own color here? How would we do that? Well, bind gets another argument called binding. And you can think of binding as an object with a whole bunch of information about this directive. I'll show you what I mean. So we can change this here from pink to binding.value. And what that is it's the value that we give the attribute, that we give the directive attribute. So we put in pink there, then the color is going to be equal to pink. The value will be equal to pink. So let's just step through that. This gets passed through here. It's picked up from the binding, and then we go binding.value, which will give us the color pink. All right, so let's see what that looks like. There we go. Harry Potter is now pink. Let's change it to red. Give that a refresh. Harry Potter is now red. So that's pretty cool. We got a lot of flexibility here. You could also pass in an object. Let's try this. And then give this object a color attribute, which would be, let's say, orange this time. And now we can grab that value, okay, which in this case is the object. Okay, so value is the object. And go value dot color. There we go. And Harry Potter is now orange. So that's pretty cool. We've now got this object here that we can do a whole bunch of things with. We can add a whole bunch of options to our directive. In fact, we can pretty much recreate v-text. Okay, so let's have a look at what v-text does again and see if we can mimic its behavior. Okay, so v-text, we put in the string Harry Potter, then Harry Potter will be inserted into there. Okay, you've probably already used this before. There we go. Harry Potter's inserted into there. What if we go v-magic, Harry Potter? What we can do is we can grab the HTML element, go inner HTML, and set it to the binding value. And let's see what that does. Gives us the exact same thing. So we've basically recreated the v-text directive, right? We've changed it from v-text to magic, and we've done it in one line of code. That's how powerful a directive is. Well, I guess technically it's more than one line, but still, you get the picture. Directives are incredibly easy to utilize. Let's do another example. What else do we have in this awesome binding object here? Well, we've got another thing called arg. So let's just have a look at what that is. Console.log binding.arg. And we're going to give it an argument. So let's just leave it as it is for now and see what that gives us. So undefined, at the moment, we have no value in arg. But if I give it a colon like this, and you've probably seen this before, for example, v on click, you might have seen this, v on click, yeah? Click is the argument that's passed through. Or you could say v on key up. There's a whole bunch of different arguments you can pass to v on. So let's have a look, v magic, and let's give it an argument of enlargen. So I'm going to copy this here. Whoops. Go back to our directive. And now we can check if that argument is equal to enlargen. So if binding.arg is equal to enlargen, we're going to do something. Console.log, it worked, just so we can do a quick sanity check. Yep, there we go, it worked. So argument is currently equal to enlargen. Now if that's true, we can say HTML element, grab that element, get into the style, and then we can say font size. And notice that I haven't gone font hyphen size as you'll usually see in CSS, because JavaScript isn't going to interpret that properly. So we have to go font capital S for size. And I think you can actually also go font size if you'd rather do it that way. Okay, so let's just do that for now. Is equal to, let's make it something really big, 100 pixels. So if the argument is equal to enlargen, we're going to grab that HTML element and make it 100 pixels. Let's see if that works. Looks like it's working, but we've got no text in there. So let's go back, give it some text. Yeah, I deleted the code that makes it, that puts this text in. There we go, we've got Harry Potter and he's really, really big. Now, what about shrink? Let's see if we can do something with that. We can just grab a lot of this code here. So I'm going to copy that, paste it down there. Instead of enlargen, we're going to shrink. And the font size, let's set it to something you'll at least be able to see. Harry Potter, there it is, nice and small. And now what I can do just to show you that this is in fact working is I can copy that down and make one enlargen and one shrink, and you'll get two different results here. There we go, Harry Potter big and Harry Potter small. So that's another cool thing you can do with directives. You can add an argument. What else? Something else that we get in this bindings object, binding, is a modifiers object. Now at the moment that's going to have nothing in it because we don't have any modifiers. Now don't worry, I'm going to explain what modifiers are in a second. Alright, so notice that the modifiers object is completely empty. Now a modifier is anything followed by a dot. Okay, so we put in here dot, I'll get rid of this line first. If we put in here dot cloak, then we're going to get cloak inside our modifiers object. Look at this. There we go, cloak, and it's always going to be equal to true. So let's add another one called, what about flip? And now we have an object with cloak and flip set to true. So why is that useful? Well, what we can do is we can create some sort of action depending on whether or not these modifiers exist. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So now I can say if binding.modifiers.cloak exists, because Harry Potter has his, his invisibility cloak, we can grab the HTML element, style, and set visibility to hidden. So now Harry Potter is going to put on his cloak and be hidden. Let's see if that works. There we go. And so it's still there. You can see it's still taking up the space, but we've added, where's our element here? Here we go. It's added the hidden attribute. And that's why it's gone invisible. So what else can we do? Well, we've got the cloak modifier. What was that other one we tried? Flip. So we can add here, if it's got the flip modifier. So check this out. It's pretty cool. We're going to say transform scale y, well that's got to be a capital Y, -1. All right, save that, refresh the page. Oh, it's still invisible, so what we'll do is we'll remove the cloak modifier. And there we go. Harry Potter has been flipped upside down. So that's pretty cool. Now we can just add and remove these whenever we want to change the styles. We can cloak him again. Makes him invisible. We can just flip it. Refresh that. And so we have these modifiers that we can add to absolutely anything. In fact, let's try that on something else, like an unordered list. So we're just going to have a whole few items. Harry Potter. Couple more. Let's add Ron. And I don't even know how to spell Dumbledore, but let's have a crack. Dumbledore, something like that. Quick Google will tell us how it's done. Ha! Got it in one. All right, so we get a list item now. We can flip that list item upside down. I mean, it's pretty useless, but also pretty cool. Let's just only flip it. So I'll get rid of the argument. And there we go. The list item has been completely flipped upside down. So, useless, trivial example, but it shows you the power that we have using directives over an element. We can do anything we want with this once we've added the modifier. Now we're going to summarize everything that we've done. So try and follow along with me here. I'm going to go fast, but feel free to pause the video whenever you want. So first we're going to go h1, give it a directive called magic. Okay, I'm going to go back here and delete everything from the directive we made before. Say view directive to create a new directive. It's called magic. And now we're going to hook into bind and console.log bound just to check that that's worked. Refresh that. Bound, good, that worked. Let me just save this. I don't think I saved that properly. Great. Okay, so that's working great. Now let's grab the HTML element itself using the first argument. HTML element. Now let's do something with that. Dot value and equal that to frog. Refresh the page. Oh, instead we want inner HTML there. Yep, there we go. So we get frog. Now, what if we want the value to be whatever we want it to be? Well, we can grab the binding here and get the value out of that. And if you remember correctly, binding is whatever's in here. So let's put in there chicken. And what it should do now is take whatever's in here and smack it inside the HTML. Chicken. Great. That's working well. What about arg? So we can add an argument. Let's make the argument, since we're doing animals, cow. And now let's just console.log that. Console.log the binding.arg. Undefined. Probably didn't save this again. Yep. And we get cow. So that's great. What about modifiers? Well, let's add moo as a modifier and cluck as a modifier. For some reason, I feel like doing animal sounds. Binding.modifiers. And there we go. Now we have access to all of the modifiers. And now just to finish up with the summary, I want to show you a couple more things that we get out of the binding. So if we look in here, we get the expression itself, okay? So notice that we get chicken with the single quotations in there, okay? So if we did, for example, 1 plus 1, so that's an expression that will be interpreted by Vue and will spit out the number 2. However, this expression here, this value here expression gives us 1 plus 1, so we can see exactly what was passed in there. And then also what we haven't covered is the raw name, which is literally just the name of the entire directive. So that's Vue custom directives in a nutshell. Let's move on. Now before you move on, try creating something with a directive, okay? Don't be lazy. Most people watch these videos and just expect the information to sink in, but we remember things the most when we start playing around with it. So let me just give you an example. I could say v random font size. See if you can create a directive that creates a random font size for whatever's inside the HTML element. And also, create your own trivial example. So make your own example like I did with magic and see what you can come up with. Maybe even post it in the comments. I'm also going to write down here the different things that you can do with a directive. So we've got the HTML element, okay? You've also got the binding. You've got the argument. You've got modifiers. You've got the value. And remember, that's what's in between here after your directive. And that's about it. Those are the only things that you're going to use for the most part when you're writing directives. So have a play, see what you can come up with, and we're going to go through some more examples in the next part of the video. Now that you have a pretty firm grasp of directives, let's see what other hooks we can hook into. So you already know we got bind. We've also got another one called inserted. Okay, and bind and inserted are very, very similar. Okay, so we're going to console.log the element here on both of them, just to do a bit of a comparison. And I'm just going to change the name here to example. We're not doing any more magic. Sorry, guys. The magic's all over. Okay, so let's go example and put that inside a div. Oop, spell example right. Okay, refresh this page. Okay, so we got the same thing here when we look at the element. However, if we go element.parent node, so if we try and grab the parent node of this element in bind, what happens? We get null, okay? So it's having trouble getting this div here. So let's call it parent div. Yeah, so we can't grab the parent div, but we can when we're using inserted. So if we grab the exact same code in here and put it in there for inserted, then we can grab the parent div. Okay, and that's just got to do with when they're placed inside the DOM. And if you want a little bit more information than that, then check out the Vue documentation on Vue custom directives. Okay, moving on. We can also check to see if data associated with this directive has been updated. Okay, so update, grab the element there, console.log the element. Okay, how are we going to do this? So we got the div there with the example. Let's give it some text. Okay, I'm going to set that equal to name. Now we're going to have to put some data in here. Return the name. And we'll need an input so we can actually change that piece of data. v-model equals name. Okay, so whenever name changes, we want to see that update happen through this directive. Okay, so we're using the update hook and we're going to console.log the element. There we go, so that's all working fine. Whenever we update the value of name, it also updates the element, which you can see down here. However, there is a slight caveat here, and that is what happens if we put the v text inside a p tag in here. All right, so let's get rid of it from there. So now a child element is going to take on the name attribute here, or sorry, the name piece of data. All right, so let's see what happens now. Refresh the page. L-U-K-E. Oh, in order to see what's going on, we're going to have to grab the inner HTML. There we go. L-U-K-E. And if you look down here, everything is delayed. So we've got a lookup here, but we have a delayed response from our component. So why is that? Well, what's happening is Vue is checking for the update of this virtual node. And when it's updated, it will then call the updated property. But we want to watch to see if this has updated, to see if its children have updated before we call the updated hook. Now, luckily, Vue has a hook for that as well, which is called component updated. Okay, and that's just going to check to see that all the children underneath this Vue directive have been updated. And when they have, then it will console.log the inner HTML. All right, so let's see if that works. refresh. There we go, and it works. So you'll notice I've got Luke written here and my whole name has been written out rather than just part of it. So that's a little difference between component updated and updated. The last hook I'm going to show you is unbind. Okay, and unbind is going to be called when, well, the directive is unbound from the element. So console.log let's say unbound. There we go, I don't even know if that's a word. So let's just simplify things here to make it a little bit easier to demonstrate this example. So we're going to have a button, and we're going to say on click. We're going to set a variable called inDom equal to the opposite of what it is currently equal to. So basically we're going to invert this inDom variable. Okay, so let's add the inDom variable here, set it to false by default. Oh, I forgot the v directive part, which is ironic considering that this is a directives tutorial. Alright, so let's get rid of the text there. Put some big text in here so we can see when it's visible. I am in the DOM. Woohoo! So what's going to happen is whenever we click on this button, inDom is going to become the opposite of what it is. So we're going to toggle the inDom variable, and we're only going to show this if it is in fact in the DOM. Okay, so let's see how that pans out. Give this a better name. Toggle. There we go, so now it's in the DOM. When we take it out of the DOM, we expect the console to log something, as that hook is called. And there it is, unbound. And so what that is that's just what we're doing here, console.logging unbound when the element is no longer in the DOM, when we've unbound the directive from the element. Now there is one small thing that I forgot to tell you, and that is in update we've actually got another argument. So we've got the element, the binding, you already know about then, virtual node, so I did touch on that. We've also got old virtual node. Okay, so this is what the directive looked like. This is what the node looked like before the update. Okay, so you got update, and this is the exact same with component updated. Okay, so you got the element, the binding, the v node, and the old v node. But unless you're doing some really advanced stuff here, then you're probably not going to need that. This is the fun part. Now that you know everything you can do with the view directive, we're going to start doing a few examples. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is just recreate Vue's vText directive. Alright, so we're going to create a div here, and inside it we'll have a h1, and we'll say v-spit out some text. I like super long directive names. And let's say Luke is awesome. Did you ever do that as a kid? You used to write down, you know, your name is awesome, stuff like that to try and make yourself feel cool. I was cool as a kid. Alright, so view.directive, and what was it called? Spit out some text, spit out some text. Alright, and now we've got some hooks. So when we've bound to this, we're going to get the element and the binding, and the elements in a HTML is going to equal the binding's value. And remember, the value is whatever's inside here. And we've used single quotations because if you didn't use single quotations, it would try and interpret Luke is awesome. Okay, so let's see if that's going to work. Yes, that works. However, there is one problem. So we have an input here, and we say model this input to something, for example, name. And we want whatever's in the input to show up there. Here we go, we've already got the name variable here. Notice that nothing's showing up there, it's not updating. Well, we're only changing the value once it's bound. We also need to add update. Okay, and we're going to do the exact same thing here. Update like that. TEST. There we go. It's working. We've just recreated Vue's v text directive. Okay, so as it turns out, there's actually a shorthand. There's a way that we can make this more dry. So what we can do, instead of passing in an object here, it's very common where we just want to update data. So what you can do, we're going to grab this here, and instead of passing in an object, we're just going to pass a function, okay, which is going to take the element and the binding, okay, paste that straight in there. And this is essentially the exact same thing. So what this will do is every single time the bind or update event occurs, this function is going to be called, okay? So this is like a default function. It's like a little bit of sugar on top of the bind and update hooks so that we can easily just do both of those things using one line of code. Okay, what have I done here? Ha! A bit of syntax there. All right, so let's refresh the page. And we get the exact same thing. Okay, so just to be clear here, what I've written there, let's just copy paste it, is the exact same as doing this. Bind, element, binding. It's the exact same as doing that and that, okay? So these two examples are equal, but because this is such a common thing to use both of those hooks in tandem, we are able to simplify it by just passing a function straight in. So there we go. We've recreated the v-text directive. Pretty sure you're going to love this next example. So what we're going to do is we're going to check if whether or not we're on a mobile device, and then show something if we are on a mobile device, or not show it if we're not on a mobile device. Let me show you what I mean. So let's say we got a H1 here. My shortcuts aren't working very well. Okay, so usually you could go v show equals, and then we could say, for example, on mobile, and that could be a method within here. So you could have methods on mobile, and then you could just do a check in there to see if you're on mobile and return true if you are, or false if you're not. So that's one way that you could do this. Or we can make this even simpler by creating our own directive, v-mobile. So if we're on a mobile, then we're going to show this H1 element. Let's see what that might look like. Okay, first let's go, you are on a mobile. And we could also have an argument here that says not. So we could say if you're not on a mobile, then we're going to say still on a PC. I mean, wait, desktop, because you could be on a Mac. Get with the times, man. Which is ironic because I'm currently on a desktop. Anyway, so first we're going to create a function that checks whether or not we are on a mobile device. And I found a really good tool for finding code, and it's called Google. So we're going to say JavaScript check is on mobile. As you can see, I've already done this before. Scroll down a little bit, and if you go to this related post, yeah, this guy's got something really simple. Obviously, you'd want to dig into this a little bit more and make sure that you're actually using the right code here that's actually going to work. But this should be fine for now. So let's just do a function and call it is, or what about just on mobile? Yeah, that's nice and clean. I like that. There we go. So if we are on a mobile, we're going to return true. If we're not on a mobile, guess what? We're going to return false. Bam. Finish. We have our on mobile function. Now let's get started on the directive itself. We're going to call it mobile, and we're going to hook into bind, accept the binding. Fantastic. Now we've got two options here, two things to look out for. One of them is if we have not. Okay, so checking if we're on a desktop. And then there's just the normal mobile directive without the argument, which is checking we're on mobile. All right, so let's do desktop first. So if binding dot arg is equal to not, so if we have the not argument, then what are we going to do? Well, first we need to check if we're on mobile, okay? So if we are on mobile, then we do not want to display the element. So we're going to element.style.display is equal to none. Okay, so if we have the argument not and we're on a mobile, then we're going to set the display to 1. I know that can be a little bit confusing, so take a moment if you need to wrap your head around that. And you might even want to consider refactoring that code, but we'll just keep it like that for the time being. Okay, so now we want to check if we're on a mobile. So in fact, we want to check if we're not on a mobile. So if we are not on a mobile and we're supposed to be, okay, oh, got a return here. All right, so if we go through this block here, we're going to return, and this is not going to be called. Okay, so if we're not on a mobile and we're supposed to be, because if we get this far in the function, then we are supposed to be on a mobile. Woo, this is confusing. Then element.style is equal to none. All right, hopefully I haven't made any mistakes there. Let's just have a check. Whoops, refresh here. Okay, so what have I done? vMobile. Aha, element.style.display. I bet you saw that. There we go, still on a desktop. Get with the times, man. And if we click on this little mobile icon here to mimic being on a mobile, you are on a mobile. There we go. So it works. Now, I'm pretty sure I know what you're thinking. Hey, Luke, can you please do a directive that creates a sound? Well, okay then, I will create a directive that makes a sound as well. So let's just keep this h1 here. And we'll say play maybe? Play sound? No. What about vSound? I think that's good. Okay, so let's create a directive for vSound. And what's going to happen is whenever we put our mouse over, okay, just like over the element like this, it's going to play a sound for us. All right, so what would that look like? First, we're going to need a sound library that will play the sound for us. And I happen to know one called Howler. Oh, howler.js, that would help. Okay, here we go. So let's go into the docs here. This is how I do it. If I ever want to find out how to install a plugin, I literally just Control F, npm, and usually you'll find it. Look, there it is there. So we're going to copy that. All right, just cancel the server for a second and install Howler. And while that's installing, I'm going to give you some lovely elevator music to suit the theme of audio. Okay, there we go. We have Howler installed. npm run serve. So let's just get that server running again. And we're going to import here. Oh wait, I better show you the API so you actually know what's going on here. Here we go. So we got the ES6 way of doing things here. So I'm just going to paste that on. We just want to see if this is going to work. All right, so you don't actually need Howler. We only need Howl. Set up the new Howl. All right, so we're going to need an audio file, of course. So I'm going to open Audacity and record something. Vue. Vue. Wow, that is so cool. They should hire me to do audio stuff for Vue. So now let's just export that. This is not a sound tutorial. Tutorials, custom directives. Here we go. We're going to go into our public folder, create a new folder in there, and let's name it sounds, because that is where we keep our sounds. vue.wav. Okay. Oh, and you get this window as well, and I'm just going to press OK on that. But this isn't a sound tutorial. This is a view tutorial. There it is in there. So now what we can do is we can easily just pass the sound in like this. Sounds slash view.wav. And that should work. And then to play the sound, we just need to go sound.play. So super easy. We're not going to change the global volume. Bring all this a little bit closer together. There we go. So we're going to import howl from howler. We're going to create a new howl, which will load our sound, and then we're going to play the sound. And we're using ES6. We don't need these silly semicolons here. No one uses that anymore. All right, so refresh the page. View. And it works. Awesome. So now that that's working, we want to make it so that when we hover over the element, it's going to play that sound. So I'm just going to take this part here and create the directive. We named it sound. And we're going to hook into bind, which takes the element and the binding. You should be getting really, really good at this now. All right. Paste that straight in there. Okay, so now we've got our sound, but we don't want to just play it straight away. First, we'll check if that works. View. Yep, so that's working. But we only want to play it when we hover over this element. So let's grab the element and we'll say add event listener. This is some vanilla JavaScript right here. And we're going to call this mouse over. Okay, so this is a built-in event listener for browsers. So when we put our mouse over, I want you to call this function, which is basically just to play the sound. Oh, make sure I've got the right syntax there. View. And it works. View. View. Okay, but there's a problem here. At the moment, we're hard coding the sound straight in. So this is a good opportunity to use template strings because we like using fancy ES6 stuff because we're cool. And we can change that to taking in the binding dot value. So what's happening here? We got vSound. We're going to say equal, so we'll give it a value. And that value is going to be view.wav. Just make sure it's in single quotations. Otherwise, it's going to try and interpret that as like, I don't know, it'll do something weird. It'll look for something called view and then like a property on the object. So we're going to make sure that's in single quotation. And then that will be set inside the binding. So binding.value. So now we're going to look for sounds slash view.wav in this case. And then we're going to play it on mouse over. Refresh. View. Yes! View. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. But it works. It works. So now we can add some more sounds in here. Let's just see if that works. Let's create a new one. Bap, bap. No, I do not work as a DJ. I know what you're thinking. Wow, Luke would make an amazing DJ. DJ. Okay, so that's in the same place now. So now we've got dj.wav. Oh my gosh, this is so silly, but it's a great example. All right, so when we put our mouse over DJ, we're going to play dj.wav. Bap, bap, view. Bap, bap, view. Bap, bap, view. Bap, 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 view. All right, so that's one way that you can create a sound directive using Vue. Now we might turn this into a plugin. And the reason I want to turn this into a plugin is because I want to make the directory where we keep all of our sounds dynamic. Now, I know this whole tutorial so far has been about directives, but we're going to have a play with plugins as well and see how plugins and directives can interact. All right, so we're going to recreate this sound directive. Don't worry, we're going to reuse a lot of the code that we already have. And we're going to create a sound plugin. So sound plugin.js. All right, so we're going to go export default here. We're going to export an object. And what happens is Vue will take this object, okay, we'll take this plugin and call the install method. All right, and install is going to take in the Vue instance, which is awesome because it means we can just do whatever we want with the Vue instance now. And it's also going to take in an options object. All right, so what's this going to look like? Well, we can just take our directive that we already have and literally just smack it straight in there. All right, so let's do that. There we go. Simple as that. Now it's going to do exactly what we did before, but using a plugin. Let's see if that works. We might have run into some problems along the way. Invalid array length. One thing we need to do is make sure we're importing how. Let's comment that out for the moment. Got a bit ahead of myself there. I got so excited at how easy it is. I realized that there is, in fact, a little bit of work I need to do. So we're going to make sure importing how, okay, because we're using that here. Now let's go back. We'll say vue.use, and let's import our plugin. So sound plugin. And where is that? And we're going to go from. It is in the current directory, the directory at sound plugin. Okay, so let's throw it in there. Bap, bap, Vue. And that's working. Okay, so now that that's working, let's have a play around and see if we can use this options object. Now, this is a lot to grok, so let me just give you a little bit of space here. Make sure that's formatted nicely. And maybe just before the binding. There we go. Hopefully that's a little bit easier. Okay, so another thing we could do is play around with the argument. So what if I did this? Get rid of that one for now. What if we set the event ourselves? So for example, we could make it click. So you play the sound when you click on this element. Well, we could do that. Let's go to our sound plugin, binding, and we could go binding.arg here. So instead of hard coding mouse over, we can just pass in the argument like that. Refresh, mouse over doesn't make it go off. Vue, clicking, does. Vue. There we go. Magic. What else can we do? Well, we want to make this folder here dynamic. So at the moment, we're hard coding sounds in, right? Hard coding sounds in there. But what if we want to have any folder we want? What if we want to be able to change the structure of our project? Well, we have this options object here. So let's see what it might look like. We could go vue.use, the plugin's called sound plugin, and we could put in an option object like this that says path, and we could equal that to sounds in this case. All right, so assuming that we've done that we've added an options object with path, we now know that this options object will have the path attribute in there. So now we can do this. Options.path. So now the path should be dynamic. Let's see if that works. Vue.use, let's add the object here. Path equal to sounds. Refresh the page. Vue. And it's still working. But just to show that that's working properly, if I change that to boop or something random like that, we're going to get an error. It's not working at all. Okay, so now we can change this to boop. Vue. And it's working again. So now we have a custom path property, and we can also use the argument of our attribute to decide on what the event will be. So let's just do one more thing to finish this off. So we get the view and the DJ sound. That one can be on click. This one can be on mouse enter. And this one can be on, I don't know, what is it, mouse exit? Don't really know the API that well. Bap, bap, whoa. Bap, bap. Okay, I guess mouse exit isn't in the API.
Bap, bap.
But click view. Yeah, you get the idea. We can set our own events here, our own event listeners. And now we have this awesome sound object that we have heaps of control over. But you would probably want to take it a little bit further and, extend this API a little bit. So what happens, for example, if we have no options? Would you want a default there?
Bap, bap.
Because at the moment, yeah, it does nothing at all. There's no default. So you would want to have a default if there isn't an argument passed. All right, so that is the Vue Sound directive, or now it's a Vue Sound plugin. Let's move on to something else. Now, you've probably come across the situation when you're building a website where you only want to show elements on a page if that user has permission to see those elements. So for example, if you have a user that is an admin, they might be able to see a button that takes them to a blog settings page. So the admin can change the settings for the blog, but you don't want to show that to the average user. And if you're a logged in user, you might be able to make a comment, for example. If you're a writer on the blog, then you should be able to create a new blog or create a new blog post, those sorts of things. So let's start off with a few menu items. So we'll have an unordered list items. Let's make 3 of them and give them children's of links. And we can also set those links to, let's just make it a hash for now. There we go. I love this in the Emmet abbreviation, how it sort of shows you exactly what it's going to look like. So now we can build that with confidence. Okay, so one of them could be create post. One of them could be create comment. Whoop. And another one could be settings. What about blog settings? There we go, save that. See if it worked. Yep, so there's our links here. However, that's probably a little bit small for you. So I'm going to go into the style tag here and just make sure that the list items have a more suitable font size. There we go. And we'll set that to 40 pixels. That should be better for you. Yep. There we go. Okay, we're ready to go. Now, what is our directive going to look like? Well, what about this? v-user, because we're talking about the user here. And maybe the argument could be can. That reads really well to me. So the user can, what about create post? We always want to make the API first so it looks exactly how we want to use it. So I'd love it if I could just say user can create post to see if a user can in fact create the post. That makes sense to me. All right, so let's plug that in here as well. But instead of create post, of course, it will be create comment. User can create comment. And then the last one here, user, For this, we want to check a role. So rather than an action, see, I think of these as actions. User can create post. User can create comment. Or is this, I want to check if they're an admin. So what about user is admin? I think that reads pretty well. So in our directive, we're going to have to check if the argument is can or is. And if it's is, then we need to check roles. If it's can, then we need to check actions. So hopefully that all makes sense. All right, let's save that. This should not work. Let's just open the console. Yeah, there we go. We don't have the directive yet. So let's create it. I'm going to just get rid of this sound plugin. Vue.directive. We're going to call it user, give an object. Now first, let's have a look at what might come in from the backend. So let access, so this can just be an object that we get from the backend that tells us what roles the user has. So how about we give that roles? And at the moment, I'm just going to set that to a string, and that can be admin. So there's one example. And then the other thing is actions they can take. So let's just call that actions, and I'll give that an array. Create, well, what were they again? Create post and create comment. So let's say they can create a post and they can create a comment. Okay, there we go. That's the access that our user is going to have. how about we build up a user object, a really simple user object. We'll give them a name, Luke Diebold, and then we'll also give them the access object. In an ES 2015, writing access on its own is the exact same as doing that. So this is equal to that. Exact same thing. It's just sort of some simpler syntax. Okay, so let's get on to our directive now. Now the first thing we're going to check is whether or not can is passed through or is passed through. So let's say on bind, grab the element and the binding. Okay, if can, we'll say binding.arg is equal to can. Then we're thinking about actions here. However, if the binding.arg is equal to is, then we're talking about roles here. Is. And I might even just give myself a little hint here. Actions, roles. And I'm not 100% sure about this. Oh, sorry. Is. I'm not 100% sure about this API yet. Maybe we should be checking for role instead of is. But anyway, we can build this up, and if there's any problems, then we can change some things later on. Now we need to check if the action passed through. So let's set that here. Let action is equal to binding dot value. So that will be the action. We need to check if that action is inside this array. Okay? So how are we going to do that? Well, if user dot access, so now we're in here, and we want to dive into actions, dot actions dot include, so this is a method that arrays has, and then we're going to say the action. So if the user has the action that we're looking for, the action that we've passed through here, then what are we going to do? Well, in that case, we actually don't want to do anything at all. That means, good, the user should be able to see this element. So we're just going to invert that by saying not. Okay, so if that is not the case, then we're going to hide the element. Element.style.display is equal to none. So let's see if that worked out for us. All of the elements are showing. What if we get rid of one of the actions? Let's say create post. There we go, it's disappeared now. And what about create comment? That's also disappeared. Now with this in place, we can easily say user can and then an action, and then all the backend has to do is say what actions the user can perform. Great, let's move on. So now what about user is? We still haven't dealt with this situation here. We want to check whether or not the user is an admin. All right then, let's come down here. So this is where we're checking for the is argument. And now we can say if user.access.roles is equal to binding.value. Okay, so if the user access roles is equal to, and I know this might be a bit confusing because I've written roles there with an S at the end because it's set to a string at the moment. The reason I've written roles is because later on we're going to turn this into an array. We're going to allow it to take in an array of roles, just in case a user can have more than one role. But anyway, let's just deal with the string scenario for now. So if it's equal to the binding value, then once again, if that's the case, then the element should be showing. We need the opposite of this scenario. Element.style.display will be equal to none. All right, so it should be showing for now. Yes, that's what we want. And if the user is not an admin, so let me just come up here and comment out this admin part here, or even set it to nothing. And it's not displayed anymore. So look at this. Look how easily we can hide and show content based on a user's actions or roles. Yeah, everything's working great. What next? Well, the code is looking a little bit clunky to me at the moment. So let's see if we can dumb it down a little bit. So let's go piece by piece. Binding.arg is equal to can. I'm pretty happy with that. Let action is equal to binding.value. I'm pretty happy with that as well. We can remove that comment for now. Now, if the user access action includes, see, this is a little bit confusing to me, so I think that we can refactor that. Wouldn't it be cool if we could just say user can and then pass through the action? Or, even better still, user cannot and then pass through the action. It'd be cool if we had both of those things available in our API. So I'm just going to grab this here. And we're going to try throwing that onto the user object. So we'll add can. That's going to take in the action, spit out the code we had before. Instead of user, we'll have to say this. So this access actions, yeah, so that's up there, includes the action that we passed through. All right, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Should now be able to go user.can and then pass through the action. So at the moment, we'll have to do the opposite sign there. Let's just check that's working. Create post. Let's just get rid of create post now. Okay, so that's still working. Now, it would also be nice to be able to say user cannot. And this should be really easy to add to the API because we can pretty much just do, I'll give you a little more space there, some really simple sugar. It cannot, that takes in the action, return this dot can, pass the action through, and we'll just have to negate that. So now look how much better this reads. If the user cannot perform the action, then hide it. And that's working really well. All right, good deal. I'm happy with that. Let's move down and have a look at this here. Now, what if we could just say user.is, kind of similar to the API we have here, and then we could just pass through the role. So then we could just go binding.value. But I want to do what I've done up here. So up here, I've set the action to binding.value because Luke later on is going to come back here and go, okay, I know that binding.value is equal to the action. Okay, it makes the code really easy to read. So let's do the exact same thing here. Let's just go let role is equal to binding.value. So now the API is going to read a lot better. We can say user is role. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So if user, I'm just going to take that out there, user.is role. Beautiful. So now we're going to have to add an is function up here. And that takes in the role, and then that'll return. So this dot actions roles is equal to binding.value. So now we can check whether they are a role like that, or we can say is not, and do the exact opposite of what we have here. Return this dot is, pass through the role, and negate that. All right, so let's have a look at what this will all look like. If user is not that role, then I want you to hide this element. What have I done here? Binding is not defined. So it looks like we're using binding somewhere inside user here. Aha! So access.roles is equal to role. Just had to use what we were passing through there. So let's see if that works. All right, so blog settings is currently showing. Let's change that from admin to nothing. and it doesn't show anymore. And it's just cleaned up the API a little bit. So at some point, of course, you would want to throw this into its own object. You wouldn't have this in one massive file. You'd want to have some import statements if you're doing something like this. Let's just bring it all back, a bit of a sanity check. Yeah, and that's all working. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm pretty happy with the API, but there's one more thing that's bugging me. What if roles were to be an array? And we had, for example, root here. I know that's not the best example, but the point I'm trying to make is that roles is probably better off as an array because a user might have, and probably does have, more than one role. How would we deal with that? Well, we're going to have to change our logic down here for role. And we're going to have to change that by looking at roles as if it were an array. So we have to say this.access.roles.includes. And I think that's about it. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. Let's see if it works. Okay, so they're currently an admin. What if we get rid of admin? Oh, sorry, the root part. Oh, we'll have to get rid of admin here and change that to root. There we go, it doesn't show anymore. Change that to frog. We're now checking an array of roles instead. But there's even one more thing still. What about making this an array? What if you want to see if they're an admin and they're a frog? Okay, I'm just going to use a really stupid example since we seem to be going along the lines of silly examples for now. So it probably makes more sense for that to be either a string or an array. So that means that we will have to check if role is an array or if role is a string. So let's say is type, oh no wait, sorry, type of, woo, getting a little bit late in the night here. So if type of role is equal to string, we'll do one thing. However, if array.isArray role, then we will do something else. Now, I find this really annoying. Let me just pass that through there. It's kind of annoying, isn't it, how you can say type of for role, but you have to say, use this different syntax here. But anyway, that's just the way it is. So let's just do a console.log here saying is string, and then a console.log if it's an array. Is array. Okay, just want to run a quick check there. Yeah, so at the moment it is an array, and if we go through to check if it's a string, yeah, so we know that our code is running down the right pathways there. So we already know what to do if it is a string. We just run through the array and we check if it's in there. So there's probably a few ways we can do this, but I'm just going to do a quick and dirty way. So let's just say the result is equal to, we'll say false by default, and then we're going to go role.forEach. So we're going to iterate over every single role. We'll call this target role. So now we have to check that every single role passed through is in this user's list of roles. If this dot roles would actually be this dot access dot roles, okay, dot contains, includes the target role, then we will do nothing. However, if it is the opposite of that, then we're going to return, we're going to change the result to false. So result equals false. Okay, I really had to work my brain for a second then. So we're going through every single role. We're going through every single role that was passed through. And just to be clear, that's all these roles. We're going to iterate over all of them. And if the target role, the role that we're currently looking at, is not included in this user's roles, then we're going to set result to false. So we'll actually set that true by default. We'll assume true unless otherwise so. So now we'll return the result, And hopefully that's it for the API. Look, I'm not sure this is the best way to do it. I'm just sort of running things off the top of my head now. So if you can find a cleaner way to that, to what we're doing here, then let me know in the comments. So let's save that. Come back, do a quick refresh. Okay, so it's not showing up. Admin and frog. Okay, so now we have the, whoop, accidentally put that in double array there. Now we've got both the roles there, admin and frog, so we should be able to view the blog settings, and there they are. Now, if we don't have admin, we cannot view the settings. If we don't have frog, we cannot view the settings. If we have both, we can. Woo! Okay, so that's fantastic. We've finished creating our, I guess you would call this user account logic or user account control. We can check whether or not the user has the roles required to view an element. We can check whether or not the user has the actions required to view an element. I think this is pretty cool and could actually come in handy. You could actually use this in your own code to dry things up a little bit. Now, before we move on, let me just give you one small challenge. See if you can change it so that we've got, for example, admin frog. See if you can make it allow this sort of syntax. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to probably break this up into its own array. So you'd have to turn it into an array that says admin frog, and then you'd have to iterate through the items in an array. So just like what we're doing at the moment. Okay, so there's a little challenge for you, and I will see you in the last example that we're going to do for this Vue Directive series. You're going to love this last example we're going to do. We're going to create a validator. So if we were modeling some data, for example, an email, and then what if we created a directive here that said v-validate and then checked if it was an email. So let's validate that this is in fact an email. That'd be cool. And just a quick disclaimer here, this isn't going to be production ready code. Okay, we're just going to do a simple example. We're going to explore some ways in which you might validate some code with a directive, but there are some examples already out there. For example, vvalidate, which does this really, really well. We're just going to be scratching the surface here to help us explore directives a little bit deeper. Okay, so having said that, let's get started. Now, since this plugin's sort of going to be like moderately big, we're going to make things a little bit more organized than we have lately. So let me just take out all this code from the last example that we did. Right, and we're going to do this using a plugin. So first, let's import, let's call it validate plugin from, and we might make a plugins directory. So let's say /plugins. Yeah, I think that's good. And then validate plugin. All right, so let's create that. New folder, plugins, and I might put the sound plugin in there as well. Create a file here called validate plugin.js. There we go. And if you remember from before, when we created a plugin, the first thing that we're going to do is have an install method. And remember, the install takes in the Vue instance, which is awesome because it means we can pretty much do whatever we want with it, and also an options object. Okay, and let's just do a console log there to check that it's working. So plugin was loaded. Now we'll go back to main.js. We've just imported it, so let's go vue.use validate plugin. So what this should do is vue.use is now going to go into the validate plugin object, and that's going to call the install method, which will console.log that the plugin was loaded. All right, let's see if that's working. This reactive module was not found. Source. I've done something wrong with the... Oh, it looks like I just needed to save it. All right, so let's do a refresh there. Plugin was loaded. Fantastic. We're started and ready to go. First things first, we're going to need an error bag in here. Okay, so how are we going to do that? What will that look like? Well, let's create a class called error bag. And we're going to put in a constructor here and say this dot errors is equal to an object. So this is where we will keep all of our errors. We'll house it all in that errors object. What else? Well, we need to add errors there. So let's say add, and then we'll say the name of the error. Then we'll just say this dot errors, and then the name of the error. And let's also have a message as well. Okay, so that takes in the error and the message. So this dot errors, the type of error. Maybe we should change that to type then. Yeah, or name. That's probably even better. Sorry about this. I want the API to look really nice though. Okay, so add the error with that name and that message accompanying the error, like so. Now what about removing an error? Occasionally we might want to remove an error. So for that we'll take in the name of the error. And now I'm thinking we will want to find that error. So this, maybe we could create a has method. So we can check first, right, if this dot has the name of the error, then we'll delete it. So if we have this error, then we'll say delete this dot errors and then the name of the error. Okay, so we're going to have to create this has method now. What will that look like? So has name of the error, return, and we need to check whether or not this object has the error that we're looking for. And we can do that by saying this dot errors name. We can just check if that is or isn't equal to undefined. So basically, we're just checking whether or not this is truthy, because if we do not have that error, we're going to have undefined. Now we should probably start playing around with this error bag to see if it works. But I've got one error here. One error in the error bag. And we just want to coerce this to a Boolean. Okay, so if you didn't know this, if you do double exclamation mark, it's going to coerce whatever comes after it into a Boolean. All right, so what I can do now is say vue.prototype $error bag is equal to the error bag. Oh, we'll just instantiate a new instance of that. Okay, so now I should be able to go into here, click on the root element, and now if you click on an element, you'll notice that it is now equal to $VM0. So you can do that with anything inside your tree, like so. So now we can say vm0.errorbag, and there we go. We have it. So at the moment it should be empty, no errors in there. Let's try adding one. Email. Oh, we'll have to give it a message. The message. Okay, so now let's just inspect the error bag and see if that has been added. There we go. Errors, email, the message. So it is now inside the error bag. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is check if it has the email in there. There we go. So now we know that has is also working. And we should also be able to delete that error. So let's just change that to delete. Oh, VM errorbag.delete is not a function. We called it remove. Sorry about that. Didn't use the API properly. Remove. There we go. So we just got an undefined. Let's check if it has the email error. False. Okay, so the API seems to be working just fine so far. And we can get rid of this console.log here. We already know that's working. The last thing I think we'll need to do is actually get the error. So to be cool, we could just say get name of the error, and this should be some pretty simple logic. Return this dot errors, and then the name of the error. Okay, get rid of that comma there. So we're just diving into the errors object and returning an error with the name that we supplied. Now let's see if that works. Refresh the page. So let's do the same thing as before. Grab the view instance. And let's see if I can just grab some of the code we wrote before. Add email with the message. And now I should be able to just get that error. .get is not a function. Okay, maybe I just need to save the main file as well. So let's save that. Might have been a problem with our reloading there. All right, so last time. Whoop. Add the error. Get the error. There we go. And we have the message of the error. So that's pretty cool. We now have an error bag API here that we can use, which is pretty nifty. Now let's grab that and put it into its own class. So what I might do here is, look, let's just keep it simple to start with. Errorbag.js. Export that class, which is called errorbag. And now we should be able to go into the validate plugin and import it. Now I know this code isn't organized very well, but you can handle that sort of thing yourself. So we're going to import the error bag, and then we're going to instantiate it here. So that's a lot cleaner. Let's just see if it works. Refresh the page. Let's try creating an error again, checking that we have that error, and it's all working great. All right, I'm pretty happy with this. I'm pretty happy with this API. We have our error bag. Let's move on to actually implementing the logic in our validate plugin. So guess what, boys and girls? We finally get to use that third argument, the v-node argument. And I'm going to show you how that works now. So let's create the directive. We're going to call it validate. And validate is going to take a function element binding v-node. Now, what we can do is we can actually grab the context, and you can kind of think of that as like the Vue instance that we have by going vnode.context. Okay, so now we can grab the context and then get the error bag out of the context, like so. So let's set the error bag to that. Error bag equals, and we'll just do a console.log to check that we do in fact have the error bag. Oh, you don't have to worry about that yet. Haha. Yeah, there we go. So now we've got the error bag. One thing we're going to need is, which you might have seen as I flashed it on the screen there, a library for validation. And to do that, rather than writing our own crazy regular expressions, because nobody wants to do that, we're going to get the approve library. Approve.js. Okay, here it is here. And a little trick I like to do is if you want to find out how to install something with npm, I just go Control F, npm install, and you can usually find it on the page pretty quickly by doing that. So I'm just going to grab this code here, copy it, shut the server down for a second, and we're going to save that. And while that installs, I'm going to sing you a beautiful song about validation. If you want to validate, then you're going to need approve.js, 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 validation, validation, validation. There we go. So that's installed and ready to go. Let's just have a quick play with approve.js. So we're going to import it. We'll call it approve, and we'll import that from approve.js. Okay, let's run the server again, npm run serve. And while that's starting up for us, we're just going to try using the approve.js API. So let's see what that looks like. Here we go. Here's an example of how it's used. So I'm just going to copy that, paste it in here. Now let's see what we got here. So these are obviously the rules that we're going to validate against. We don't need required for now. We're just checking for an email. And then it looks like we're approving a value. This is the value we're approving, and they are the rules that we're approving them against. So I reckon we could just pass the object straight in here like this. Email true. So we can get rid of that. I think that's a little bit redundant. And now we should have the result that we can inspect. So let's console.log the result. There we go. Our server's up now. And I'm just going to refresh this page. There we go. So it looks like it's validated that email successfully and returned true. Let's just check that it will in fact return false if the email is not valid. There we go. Approved is now false. So we have a validator that works nicely. So that's the validator working. Let's just comment that out for now and write a little bit of pseudocode, or not even pseudocode, just a few comments so we can wrap our head around what we're about to try and conquer here. So first, we want to see if we're validating an email. So we're going to have to check the binding argument, and if that's equal to email, then we know we are validating an email. If the email is invalid, what will we do? We'll add an error to the error bag. Okay, so what if the email is valid? Then we need to check if there's an error in the error bag, and if there is, then we need to remove it because the email is now valid. So if email is valid, remove error from the error bag. Okay, and I think that's just about it. So first, let's just tackle this piece here, if validating an email. Well, this should be pretty straightforward for you by now. If we go if binding.arg, so if the argument that was passed through is equal to email, then we'll console.log validating an email. So let's just check that that's working. We are passing through, here we go, email is the argument. Refresh the page, validating an email. So that's being called. And if we write something gibberish-y, boop, refresh the page, and it doesn't show up anymore. So we know that that's working. Now we need to check if we have an error, and if there is, we're going to add it to the error bag. So we're actually going to have to pass these comments up into here. We've kind of missed a step here. We do need to validate the email first. We do need to check that the email is valid. Okay, so let's check if it's valid. And we'll put the result into results. And that's actually just what we got down here. So that's that bit of code there. Okay, approved.value. So now we need to grab the email, and the email will be equal to whatever's inside the input. So element.value. So whatever's the value of the element is, that will be the email that's currently in there. And we're going to check if that is an email. Okay? So let's just console.log that now and check that the result is how we want it to be. Do a quick refresh. So approved currently says false, and we're going to console.log it every single time we type something in there. So now let's go look at ldebold.co. There we go. Now we're getting true. So now that's working and we can validate that the email is in fact correct. That's exciting. We're getting really close. Now, if the email is valid, add error to the error bag. So what does that look like? Well, if result.approve, and we want the opposite of that, okay? So if we do not approve of this result, then we're going to go into the error bag and add an email error that will say, hey, you've given us an invalid email. Okay, so let's just check if that's working now. We should now be able to, make sure I've written approve properly. So now let's just console.log the error bag. I like to experiment a lot and constantly see where I'm at. That's why I'm console.logging all the time. There we go. So now we have this invalid email inside the error bag. So that's working all right. Let's take the next chunk of logic. Whoops. Get rid of that line there. If email is valid, remove error from the error bag, and we only want to remove it if it exists. So if result.approved error bag dot remove email, but we do want to check if the error exists first. So let's say and result dot has email. Oh, not result dot has, sorry, we need to get into the error bag. So if the error bag has email as well, because we don't want to try and remove something if it's not even there. Okay, so if the email is valid, then we want to remove the error from the error bag to make sure that the error bag is up to date. So now let's just console.log the error bag there and check that that's working. So look at ldbowl.com. There we go. So now we're getting the error bag and we have no errors, and that's exactly what we want. We don't want any errors in that error bag if there is nothing wrong. So you may be thinking, well, great, that's pretty much it. Let's get rid of all these lines here, tidy things up a little bit. There we go, make it a little bit neater. Okay, because I think the code reads pretty well. These comments feel a little bit redundant to me. You could probably add a few of your own comments just for a little bit of further explanation for future you. But for now, let's see if we can actually take the error and spit it out. So if error bag dot has email. So if we have an email, the email field inside the error bag, and I'm just going to say here v-text is equal to error bag dot, and we want to get the message out of the error bag. So dot get email. There we go. So we're validating the email, and the email, this validation behind the scenes will update an error object that we have on the Vue instance, and that error object is error bag. Oh, we should actually have a $sign here. Yeah, because you'll remember that back here, yeah, we said $sign error bag on the Vue prototype. So that means we're actually going to have this error bag available everywhere. So now we can check to see if we have the email inside the error bag, and if we do, then we're going to spit out the text that is inside that error. And we got a problem, and that's because I've just forgotten to put in the end of the double quotes there. So just save that. Scroll down. Yeah, there we go. That seems to be compiling fine now. So let's reload it, see if it all works. If I start writing something, we get an invalid email, and let's just make it red. Sorry guys, I bet you're on edge now, wondering if this is going to work. So let's give that an error class, and we'll say error. We'll just make the font red. So we'll say color red. Wonderful. Okay, so that's invalid at example.com. There we go. We now have a valid email. How cool is that? We've created our own vvalidate directive, and that is our last example. Now, if you want to dig a little bit deeper into this, the vvalidate directive is probably a good place to start if you want to go really deep, because it utilizes quite a bit of what directives can do. So if you just look up vvalidate in Google, here it is here. This is a pretty amazing library. The documentation's really great as well, and you can just sort of look through the code and see how he does it. So just dive into here if you're really interested in learning about validators. There's probably something here called directive. Here we go. So this is where he creates the directive. Yeah, and you can just sort of like comb through this code and figure out what's going on here. So you can see, for example, validator. He's grabbed the v node in the context like we did before, and grabbed the validator out of there. I actually got that idea from this plugin, but this plugin is a lot more advanced. He covers a whole bunch of scenarios. It's great code. Check it out if you want to dive deeper into validators. But that's it for now. That's my tutorial on Vue directives. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, then try this. See if you can change the syntax to something like this: validate, and then cross that out, equal to email. And then we can put like the pipe sign. I think that's called a pipe sign. Required, and see if you can start running through some validation rules, and maybe even grabbing. So let's go back here into the validate plugin. Maybe you could even grab things from the approved.js API dynamically. So going approved.value, maybe you could grab this email value here dynamically. You could do something like that and create a much more robust validator plugin. But this would just be an experiment. This would just be for fun, because in reality, I mean, this plugin is awesome. It's got everything you need for Vue validation ready to go out of the box. But it's really fun to just explore with this stuff and deepen your knowledge on Vue directives. Thank you for watching this video, guys. I've had a blast creating it. I hope that it's helped you. I hope that you didn't find it too long and that you stuck it out to get right through to the end, because I really think it is important to really drill through a concept so that it sinks into your head and it becomes a part of you. It becomes a part of the way you think, so that you can go to bed at night and start thinking in Vue directives. You can start writing code in your head. You can start thinking ahead of time exactly what you want to do, so that it becomes easier to get into a flow state and create things quickly and start thinking in code. I think that's really exciting. That's the place I want to get to, and that's why I've created such an in-depth video. My philosophy is that if you drill a concept enough, you run it through different scenarios, and you push it to its limits, then you get to know it really, really well, and it becomes so much more interesting, so much more fun to use that concept. So you're not constantly combing through the documentation and trying to figure out stuff that you don't fully understand. So I hope this was helpful. I've created a super short survey in the links to this video. It's literally just like 5 questions, and it's going to help me in the future to do better videos like this. So if there's stuff that you didn't like about it, I want to know. You're going to be saving a whole lot of people some turmoil if you let me know what I've done wrong so that I can fix it. And let me know what I'm doing right as well, because, I mean, to be honest, it just makes me feel good about myself and means that I can do that more in future videos. Thank you so much, guys. I've had a blast. See you in the next video. Go on, give it a click. I know you want to. It's gonna help me so much. Please. Oh, that sounded a bit desperate. You know, just like, you know, maybe just do the survey if you want to. But, you know, whatever. I don't really mind either way. Just like, you know, either way is cool. If you want to click it, then click it. But if you don't want to, then like that's cool too, I guess. Okay, bye. Do the survey.